9715.
Hey there, and welcome to Bigfoot for Breakfast, home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we sit in the studio every week challenging conventional thought. We are your hosts, Sarah Jones
and Samantha Carter.
We want to start out this week's episode by saying thank you, as usual, to everyone who showed up to listen to us this week, and also the previous weeks, because while we are still yet but a wee little podcast, this thing has gotten a bit bigger than we expected, and every single week it has continued to grow, so we are pretty proud of it, and happy to entertain you guys. We're having a ton of fun with this, so thank you very much. We really want to continue to grow, so don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening from, and if you feel really generous, leave us a review. We want to remind you that the best way to get the word out there when it comes to podcasts is word of mouth, so if you know anyone who would be interested in listening, recommend us to a friend or whoever. You guys have been so awesome in helping us out, and we can think of nothing we'd rather do in our spare time than just sit around, drinking some coffee, and talking about creepy things.
We've got tons of topics lined up, and honestly, each week it's been difficult to decide what to talk about because we seriously are so excited about each and every one of them. So we're just going to keep plugging away at the ones we have, but if you guys out there have anything in mind that you'd like to see covered, let us know and we'll do our very best to get it done. If you haven't already done so, add us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get up-to-date info on what's going on in the studio, or just to enjoy some hilarious memes. Sometimes even studio dog Johnny Utah makes an appearance on social media. So if you're interested in getting to know him, he's a really pretty interesting guy. He's very pensive sometimes, staring out the window.
Oh, he's intense.
He is.
Like he sees something and he is focused.
Also, we started a contest for the month of January. I know that I had announced previously we were going to do a live, but let's be honest, I made a picture of margaritas and Sarah couldn't get me focused. So I'm not even going to lie to you guys. If you have Twitter, all you have to do is tweet us or retweet us or whatever, and you'll be entered to win either a Bigfoot for Breakfast mug or a t-shirt. We'll have one of each, and we're gonna pick 2 winners this time.
Woo!
Whoop whoop! And a oop and a oop.
And you what?
You know.
I
the
really
people
don't.
the people who are up to date and like in the world, they know.
You mean the kids?
Mm-hmm.
And I oop, and I oop, and I floop.
No, we don't floop. So, anyway, we're deciding through a couple of different t-shirt designs right now, so we'll try to get a photo of it posted on Facebook soon. We're going to draw for the prizes on Friday, January 31st on Facebook Live, so pay attention, folks. You might get some good free stuff if you want it, and if not, take it to the Goodwill.
Or just keep it.
Or just keep it.
Okay, so let's get right into it this week. This week's episode covers a little-known area in the eastern United States, deep in the heart of beautiful Vermont. No doubt you've heard of the Bermuda Triangle, and possibly even the Alaskan Triangle. Yes, there is an Alaskan Triangle. But not too many of you have heard of the Bennington Triangle. I guess I surprisingly even find this one to be the most creepy, and it's probably pretty weird that I kind of want to go there and see what's up. Because since the arrival of people to this area, there have been strange stories of happenings throughout it. I have to try to explain the Bennington Triangle geographically, I guess. The Bennington Triangle consists of the towns of Bennington, Glastenbury, Woodsford, Shaftesbury, and Somerset, and pretty much covers most of southern Vermont.
What's with all the burries? We're fancy in the bury.
Right. Raspberry. We have to start right in the middle of the Bennington Triangle, though, I think. And this center leads us straight into Glastenbury Mountain, home of the town of Glastenbury.
You don't say.
Right? The area is known for its huge expanse of backcountry and thick wilderness. There is a small mountain range here with 12 peaks that reach over 3,000 feet in elevation, with the largest being Glastenbury Mountain at over 3,700 feet. This area is home to the Green Mountain National Forest and houses the town or village of Glastenbury, which has long been declared a ghost town.
I wonder if there's any Bigfoot sightings out there.
Sam hasn't read the episode. We'll talk about that.
Y'all are to bear with me today. I am severely lacking in Z's, so I'm a little loopy.
Yep. She's in the same place I was last week.
So, from the very beginning, the town was impossible until it was possible.
No, it wasn't possible.
Flashback. It was established in 1761 by a man named Benning Wentworth. Why can't we have cool names?
Benning Wentworth.
Bennington.
Oh, Benny.
Benning Wentworth, not JG. Benning.
What are you talking about?
877 cash now. Anyway.
It's my money and I need it now.
Call J.G. Wentworth. Wentworth was the governor of New Hampshire at the time. Apparently, the man had never actually been to Vermont, so he was unfamiliar with the extremely challenging terrain of the wild areas, but he did have a map.
He had a map.
A map.
No, don't go there. Not Dora.
So, he simply took the map and drew lines on it for towns to be established.
Yes, he did.
That's how I roll.
Just put it here.
Let's just wing it.
It was destined for ghost towndom from the very beginning. The terrain on which it was settled was extremely rough, and growing anything here was nearly impossible because of this, and the growing season was very short. It was a logging town and mining town, and the coal that was produced here was brought out of the town via railroad, which ran straight up the mountain. At the time, it was the steepest railroad ever built in America. The train was so heavy and the incline was so steep that it climbed the 9-mile incline at 250 feet per mile.
I think I can.
Chugga, chugga, chugga. Roads were never put in place in Glastenbury due to the steep incline and rugged area.
So, a roadless town.
Correct.
They tried to make the town work, but the people here were met with endless obstacles. The resources were drying up, and since they had logged most of the mountainside, that left them completely unprotected from the strange weather patterns that were known to occur in the mountain. And finally, in 1897, a massive flood rushed over the town and completely tore out the railroad. Unforeseen.
Not really.
That was sarcasm.
Okay.
I didn't put my sarcasm face on. Sorry.
You didn't. 100%.
I didn't even have the little eye twitch thing that I do. I don't know. Anyway, obviously, with no money to be made here, people left the town as it stood. Strangely, a family of 3 people, the Mattisons, chose to remain
all alone
and keep Glastonbury on the map. They even held all of the town offices between them. While this got the attention of Ripley's Believe It or Not, the establishment proved to be futile. Is it futile or futile?
Futile.
How would you say it? I say futile.
I do too. Futile.
It's one of the only words in my vocabulary that I say with an accent.
Futile is
futile.
So boring.
I'll be your Glastonbury. I've been on a Western kick. I've watched like
Doc Holliday.
Every movie regarding Doc Holliday that's available on Netflix and Amazon Video.
That's like daily for me. I heart Doc.
Val Kilmer, really, he's the only Doc.
He drove it home.
He's Doc Holliday. Sorry for everybody else who played Doc Holliday.
We don't even know who you are.
Right?
Because Val Kilmer nailed it.
So, Glastonbury was officially unincorporated in 1937. Even though it's considered to be a ghost town, a 2010 census states that 8 people still reside there.
Well, they resided there in 2010.
Resided there
It doesn't seem like it, but that's been 10 years ago.
Resode?
No.
They resode there.
They resided there. They lived there in past tense.
Even at its peak, though, the town was never exactly big, you don't say.
Nah, it was hard to get to.
I read that in its heyday, the town's population reached 241 people.
It was kind of a cool town, though. Like, if you guys want to really look into this, go look at the pictures of Glastonbury itself. They had the big kilns, you know, for the charcoal, and they had this huge lodging house for all of the miners that lived there. And later on, when the town started to go downhill and they were kind of desperately trying to hold on to it, the people who lived there, they turned it into a tourist resort for a little while. And they took the lodge house and they made it into a hotel. And they took another really cool building and they made it actually into a casino. And then they turned the railroad into, what are those, like the trolley cars that run up like on a line? You know what I'm talking about? The cable cars?
Mm-hmm.
But they run up, it was a really fancy trolley. And
like
so they were shipping people.
The mountain?
It went up the mountain.
Oh.
So they were shipping people from down at the bottom up to the top of the mountain, and people were staying there, but it actually didn't go over either. So, which is surprising because it's so cool. You guys have to look it up.
Now that we know a little bit of history, let's get into the weird stuff.
I love the weird stuff.
Weird.
It's about time. Not that the history isn't cool too, actually, but
weird.
I'm going to say we minimize that some.
Yeah, a little bit.
We summarize and then really hit the weird hard. It's the way we roll. We hit the weird hard. We should put that on a t-shirt.
Welcome to the home of the mysterious and macabre, where we hit the weird hard. That's a t-shirt.
It is a t-shirt.
We hit the weird hard. We hit the weird hard.
It sounds dirty.
What's that? What are we going to do? The whispering?
ASMR. Yeah. But now is not the time.
Oh, it's always time.
One of the very first things to come about for the area were reports of what or who came to be known as the Glastenbury Wild Man. In the mid to late 1860s, there were reports of a man who would terrorize women who were in the woods or even close to the edge of town near the woods. Rumor has it that he would come up to them, wearing a very long coat. He would approach the woman, waving a pistol in the air and screaming obscenities as he pulled his coat open. Why are you laughing?
Because literally he's the flasher.
I know. I thought of the exact same thing. So he's not done. Hold on. So he pulled his coat open, revealing his naked body. He would then strangely just retreat back into the woods. He was said to live in a cave somewhere in the area, so that's interesting. I guess that's one way to get a date, but it sounds like it was a pretty unpopular strategy.
Yeah, it didn't work for me either.
When you did it?
Yeah, I didn't get any dates out of it.
They didn't go for that?
Couple of restraining orders.
That'll get you sent to the pokey these days. Trust me. Too bad they didn't just have Tinder back then so they could save their embarrassment. Since that seems to be what Tinder's all about nowadays.
Right.
You kids.
I don't know. I've never been on Tinder.
I don't either. But we talked to a lot of people who are. So it's unclear from reading how long this went on, but I'm sure any amount of time was a bit too long.
So is it cold there in Glastonbury?
Yeah. I think during the day it's really nice, but then the temperatures like plummet because it's a mountain.
Brave man.
Yeah. He must have been near his cave so he could hurry back.
Quite a while later, in 1892, there was a man who was working at a sawmill in Fayetteville. Fayetteville. He was not naked, which was...
He was fully clothed. This one.
This guy. He wore pants.
Keep reading.
No pokey for him.
Yeah, there is.
So there's a little bit of a pokey.
You're wrong.
That's where you're wrong. Kid. Can't answer every question. Finger guns.
Finger pistols.
It's better than the other pistol that the guy was whipping out. So Fayetteville, which was another village within the Triangle, his name was John Crowley, and he was 38 years old at the time. After a night of heavy drinking with friends, oh, this never ends well. He was found to have been bludgeoned to death with a rock by another man named Henry McDowell. It was said that the two men had recently been involved in a heated argument. McDowell hurriedly hopped a train and headed for Canada, but he never made it there because he went ahead and turned himself in when the train reached the town of South Norwalk in Connecticut. He immediately confessed to the murder and was declared to be insane because he told the authorities that he was hearing voices in his head that told him to kill John Crowley, among other things. It's important to note that apparently William McDowell wasn't even the killer's real name. In a documentary put together by Joe Derwin called Bennington Triangle / Glastenbury, Virginia, it is stated that his real name is actually William Conroy, but he went by a lot of different names.
McDowell was ordered to live out his sentence in the Vermont State Asylum, but soon after he arrived there, he was allowed to begin working out in the rail yard for the institution. He hid himself under a load of coal inside one of the train cars, and as the train departed from the yard, so did William McDowell. He escaped from the asylum and was never seen or heard from again. The rumor mill around the area went crazy then, and it was widely believed that McDowell made his way back to the familiar Glastenbury forest and mountain area because he would easily be able to conceal himself there, and he knew the terrain and the resources. 5
short years after McDowell left the asylum, on the very first day of the very first deer season ever held in Vermont, a hunter was found dead in the woods. His name was John Harbor, and he was a resident of the nearby town of Woodford, a prominent one at that. He was only 40 years old and had gone out into the woods by himself, as he had many times before in the hopes of shooting a buck. He didn't come back, and some people went looking for him, and when his body was found, it looked as though he hadn't died immediately, but rather bled out slowly over time, too weakened and injured to go for help. It also appeared that his body may have been dragged many yards to the spot at which it was found. There were never any suspects, and the murder went completely unsolved.
I guess I didn't really specify in here. I just assumed everyone would kind of know, but he was found to have been shot. It wasn't like an injury like he fell or something and he was bleeding out. Somebody shot him.
Straight up gangster.
It was obvious murder.
Murder Inc. Drop a beat.
Drop one.
No. I will not.
All right. In 1932, in the East Middlebury area within the Triangle, a mother, approximately 45 years old, and her 2 children, approximately 10 and 14 years old, 1 boy and 1 girl, were found in the woods having been shot to death by a .38 caliber auto-loading type pistol. It was determined not to be a murder-suicide since the position of the mother's wound could not have been self-inflicted. One of the children had just had exceedingly skillful and costly dental work, including tooth straightening devices, in place, which indicated that they were from a wealthy family, but they were never identified. I read in another article that they had been found in a very remote area of the woods and had been covered with tree branches, a woolen blanket, and old automobile curtains. It was determined that the people were likely killed elsewhere and then brought to the remote area. So I'm not sure if this case is connected to the many other strange happenings that we'll be talking about, but I did think that these people were worth a mention here.
So at this point in existence, this area is extremely remote and untouched, and this is according to Vermont standards at that. It's very isolated. Now we're going to be talking about a good number of oddities regarding this stretch of wilderness, but I think it's important that we begin with one category. We're going to talk about some of the strange circumstances under which some people have disappeared in this area. And by disappeared, I mean seriously vanished, into thin air disappeared, like Hillary Clinton disappeared.
She didn't disappear anybody. Well, she might have. We don't know.
Yeah, mostly she just straight up and kills you.
Gangsta in a bad way.
I was talking last night, but I said I wanted to do like an episode and cover the whole Epstein thing, but I really don't feel like killing myself. Not today.
Not today is right. I say we still do it. We can take her. I feel confident.
I'm old and infirm, but also I'm a millionaire and hire assassins
that are stronger. I don't need Jason Statham up in my house trying to get me because I feel like he'd win.
You could send Jason Momoa, though.
Not to kill us.
In my house.
He's so nice. Jason Statham is probably nice, too.
I don't know. Jason Momoa could take you out with, like, an axe.
That's what makes him so cool. Because he's always doing nice stuff.
He does do nice stuff.
Okay. There was a 5-year span from 1945 to 1950 in which these disappearances really seemed to pick up in frequency. There are some people who have come to the conclusion that this must be due to a serial killer being in the area during this time, but there is a lot of evidence to the contrary, or lack thereof.
Lack of evidence to the contrary, or lack of evidence to prove the serial killer?
There's lack of evidence to prove that there was a serial killer. Okay. And I'll go ahead, we don't discuss this later, and I'll go ahead and say why. Because we're going to discuss probably 4 or 5 different disappearances here. But they kind of decided that it probably wasn't a serial killer just because...
Just a bunch of people that are just killing people?
Well, I don't know. Because the victims actually range in age from 8 years old to 75 years old. And there's a mix of men and women. They all literally have nothing in common. So usually, you know, serial killers kind of categorize or they have like a specific type.
So there's zero victimology.
None. At all.
But if you think about it, if it's like a guy who's hiding in the woods for survival,
it's remote.
And he's cray-cray, and he's just paranoid, he's going to kill everyone that comes across him because he's going to think, oh, they're going to rat me out.
Right. So there's been that theory too. And, you know, that's where this guy, William McDowell, came in. They kind of thought that maybe he was just roaming the woods. But from the time that William McDowell went missing and went possibly into the woods to the time that the last few disappearances happened, he would have been impossibly elderly. So, and the fact also that since they disappeared into thin air, in a lot of these cases, there were actually family members nearby. So in order to quietly and quickly completely disappear these people when they were looked for so quickly afterwards, you would have to be pretty strong, I would think, and agile.
So they're just falling into interdimensional portals in the woods.
We're going to talk about some possibilities. Yes. Yes, that's what's happening.
We're going to begin with the first one to have happened. This was a 75-year-old man by the name of Mitty Rivers. At 75 years old, you would think that it would be easy for him to have experienced an accident or a health issue due to age, but Mitty was kind of a badass, actually, and served as a mountain guide in the area. He knew the terrain very well and was said to be in very good shape, being used to hiking the mountain regularly. He was leading one of his hunting groups to camp, and he walked ahead of them just a little ways near a well-known road called Long Trail Road.
So imagine you're part of a hunting group. Your trusted, reliable, highly recommended guide states that they're going to hike ahead on the trail to quickly check out the terrain. He goes ahead, only he never comes back for you. He just vanishes. You keep walking and walking, thinking you should come upon him had he been injured, but you never do. You don't see anything. The hunting party that he was skillfully guiding finally gets back to town, and guess what? No Mitty Rivers there either. So they reported what happened to the locals, who immediately became very concerned because this was extremely unlike him, and they have never known him to abandon a hunting party. I would think this to be true because this would have been how he made his money, and it sounds like he took it very seriously as he was a skilled woodsman in the area and knew how dangerous the terrain could be for inexperienced people. A search party was gathered up and the area was combed over pretty thoroughly. No remains or traces of evidence were found of Mitty himself, but one strange thing was located. A single unused rifle cartridge that was the same type Mitty used was found off the trail in a stream. To this day, that is the only evidence that he was ever even there. Mitty was an experienced and reliable guide, and he would have never left a group out there on their own if he was responsible for them.
In 1942, 13-year-old Melvin Hill disappeared in Bennington. This is stated on nearly every single site, but couldn't find one newspaper article about this, so I'm not extremely certain of the circumstances here.
In 1943, a man named Carl Herrick, who was 37 years old, went missing during a hunting trip in the woods with his cousin, Henry. They separated at some point, and as Henry got back to the camp, he noticed that Carl had not yet returned. After a while, it was getting dark, so Henry got worried and called the police since Carl should have been back hours ago. A heavy search of the area was conducted by law enforcement, and he was discovered 3 days after he was last seen. He was lying on the ground in the forest with his fully loaded rifle sitting only feet away, propped up against the tree. The post-mortem examination states that his upper body had been crushed, seemingly squeezed to death by something very large.
A serial crushed by a huge freaking guy.
No other sign of animal attack. Around his body, in the mud, there were many sets of very large footprints that nobody recognized. It was determined that the footprints were so large that it had to be some kind of bear. But ObscureVermont.com poses a good question. What kind of bear squeezes a person to death? I love you.
A huggy bear.
Care Bear. He loved him too much.
That's how I killed my aloe plant. I loved it too much.
That's 100% the truth.
So, the next to go missing was less than a year later in 1946. A woman by the name of Paula Weldon went hiking on a popular trail in the woods near the mountain. Apparently, she had every intention of returning quickly, as by witness accounts, she was not dressed at all for the cold weather that was predicted for that evening. She had just gotten off work from a local diner on campus, and before leaving for her walk, she stopped in at her dormitory to let her roommate know where she would be going. She wondered if anybody wanted to go along, but no one seemed interested or they were too busy, so she ended up going alone, leaving approximately at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a popular trail that she was on, and several other people had encountered her. It was also known to be a very easy trail, and many times the walk was taken by the local elderly. She asked a man at one point how far the trail went. An elderly couple was walking approximately 100 yards behind Weldon and could see her clearly for a great length of time due to the bright red jacket that she was wearing. They stated that they saw her turn a corner, and when they got to the corner a little later, they turned to see a long stretch of trail, and they thought that they should have been able to see the woman, but they didn't. She was gone. They didn't think much of it until later on, after they'd been home for a while and heard that she was missing. Paula had failed to return home and then failed to show up for class on Monday morning, so the college called the police. As word spread throughout the area of Paula's unlikely disappearance, people immediately seemed to recognize that something was very wrong, and a search party was assembled to comb through the area. The search consisted of over 1,000 people, police dogs, and helicopters. Even a clairvoyant was present to assist in the search for the missing girl. Of course there was. A $5,000 reward was offered for her recovery and her return had she been taken, but no sign of Paula was ever found. Even the FBI got involved, but this was not helpful either. Paula Weldon was a student at Bennington College, and she was only 18 years old when she disappeared. They searched for approximately 21 days before it all came to an end, and no evidence of any kind was ever found. Not a single trace of Paula Weldon ever again.
It sounds to me like a pretty intense and thorough search was actually conducted on the part of the town and the police, but apparently the police felt that they could have done much better, and this caused them to examine their own practices. I think Paula Weldon's father actually had something to do with it. I think he was kind of an affluent guy, and he was very upset. And he criticized the police a lot for their lack of preparedness for a situation like this in such a massive search. Something like this has never really happened. You don't have protocols in place or like a certain practice that you follow in order to conduct a huge search of 1,000 people or helicopters. And so it just caused them to kind of re-examine their protocols and what they would do in such a remote area, which was really awesome. And it led to the formation of the Vermont State Police. There were a lot of people who seemed to have concluded that she did not like her family dynamic or the direction that her life was going. So she either ran away or she committed suicide out there in the woods. Like we said, no evidence of this or anything else exists. So it's still a mystery. I find that conclusion kind of strange since she stopped by the dormitory before she left to see if any of her friends would join her. I feel like if she wanted to disappear or commit suicide, she would have just went out and done it.
Next up, and by far, in my opinion, the strangest of these disappearances was that of a man named James Tedford in 1949. James was an Army veteran from Bennington, and he had just been to visit his family in northern Vermont. He was traveling there and back via passenger bus, and he was on his way home to the Bennington Soldiers' Home. There were 14 other people on the bus along with him, aside from the driver. James boarded the bus on the last stop before Bennington with luggage in hand. There were no other stops between here and his destination for him to have gotten off the bus at any point.
So he couldn't have gotten off the bus.
So he sat alone in his seat with his luggage in the compartment directly overhead, an open timetable for the bus route laying open in his seat next to the window. The bus stopped at his destination, but James never made it home because he wasn't there to get off the bus. Once again, there were no stops between when he was last seen and his stop, so his fellow passengers were extremely baffled by this. This is like one of those situations like that lady that was part of her own search party.
Yeah.
Because she changed her shirt and no one recognized her. So she didn't know who they were describing, so she was looking for herself. His luggage remained in the compartment and his trip timetable remained open where it had been out, but James was nowhere to be found. In his belongings were also his wallet and a bunch of cash. The passengers were interviewed and they all deny seeing anything even remotely suspicious and deny any violent occurrences. 1 minute he was there, sleeping soundly in his seat, and then he just wasn't. Aliens. How does a man disappear from a moving bus full of passengers without a single person ever seeing anything?
Aliens.
Aliens. The route that was taken between when James Tedford was last seen and to his destination traveled straight through the Bennington Triangle.
It is stated on obscurevermont.com that the driver at first didn't think much of it. His belongings were gathered and left in the station in case James returned to collect them. He actually wasn't reported missing until a week later, when the soldiers' home at which he resided became curious as to whether or not he was coming home after visiting his family. They called his relatives, who were completely alarmed by this, as he left their house on time and he should have been back home for days. The police became involved in this matter, and the bus driver and the passengers were interviewed at this time, who stated then that they had seen nothing unusual and didn't notice any strange behavior at all from James on the bus.
Later in 1949, several sites and articles make mention of a 3-person hunting party that also went missing in the woods, but that's all I could find about that incident anywhere. No other information regarding these people was located, so we can't go into any further details on this incident.
Kind of stinks because I'm not even sure if that one and then that 13-year-old boy that I couldn't find anything on either. It makes you wonder if that was even true. I was looking through old newspaper archives from the Bennington Banner. And so you would think if there was a 13-year-old boy or a trio of hunters that went missing, there'd be at least one article. In 1950, there were 2 disappearances. The first being an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jeffson, who had gone to the dump with his mother outside of Bennington. His mother was the caretaker at the dump site, so this was a pretty common thing for them to do. He remained in the vehicle, playing with some toys, while his mother left the truck to go check things out. She returned shortly afterwards to find her son to be gone. Paul was wearing a bright red jacket, and she hadn't been gone long, so she thought that it would be easy to find him. But it wasn't like him to leave the truck at all. When she didn't find him soon after, his mother went to town for help. Just like with Paula Weldon, a massive search was launched trying to find this child. A double-check system was implemented in the search. For those who don't know what that means, it means that when one group finished searching a small area, another group would go through and search the same area. It moved like this throughout a large span of space. The Coast Guard brought in planes to assist as well. So Paul either left the truck on his own or he was taken from the truck by someone else. It is known that he at least made it to the road, which is actually a couple miles away from where he was last seen at his mother's vehicle. They know this because a search took place with specially trained bloodhounds operated by the state police, and the dogs did hit on a scent that took them to the road, but then it abruptly stopped. This made them think that maybe he was abducted by another person who had a car waiting at the road, but other than that hit on the scent, no sign of Paul was ever found. It is also said that as they were looking through that night with the dogs, it was raining heavily. I have read about some speculation that this may have washed away some of the scent, and that's why the dogs only got as far as the road before they lost it. If he was headed to the mountains, maybe he did keep walking beyond there and was just undetectable by then. Paul's father states that they were right at the foothills of the mountains, and for the days leading up to the disappearance, the mountains were all Paul talked about, obsessively. Paul's father thinks that the mountains called the boy in.
Like Paula Weldon, Paul went missing while wearing a bright red jacket. Interestingly, to this very day, many of the locals will tell you that it is considered to be bad luck to wear red if you're going into the woods or onto Glastenbury Mountain.
This landfill that Paul's parents worked at also apparently had some pigs on the property that his parents tended to. Another theory regarding the disappearance of Paul is that he got out of the truck to look at the pigs, somehow got in with them, and was eaten by them. Ugh. The parents at one point stopped talking to the media regarding their missing boy because all of the nasty headlines and articles that speculated on the circumstances of his disappearance. They already felt like the rumor about the pigs eating their son was distasteful. And then it wasn't long before there were articles speculating that the parents had killed the boy at the dump site and fed him to the hogs themselves. Sadly, this seems to be the most popular theory of the time.
That is freaking horrific.
It's awful. I mean, it's awful if they did it, but if they didn't, that's even worse.
2 short weeks after the disappearance of Paul Jepson, yet another disappearance struck the area, the next being a woman by the name of Frida Langer. She was camping in the woods with some family members, and she and her cousin decided to go for a little walk in the woods, but soon after their departure from the campsite, she slipped right into a stream of cold water, and all of her clothes were soaked. She was only about 100 meters from the campsite, so she decided to take the short walk back to the site and just quickly change her clothes. I read a few different reports of this incident, and some state that she was only about 100 meters from camp, and some say that she was about a half a mile. I guess there's not a huge difference in that, but I wanted to acknowledge that the difference in reports do exist. Since it was only a short distance from the camp, it was a straight, easy shot back, and it was right in the middle of the day. No danger was really perceived, and her cousin decided to wait there for her to return, and then they could continue their hike when she dried off. He waited and waited, but when Frida didn't return for more than an hour, he went back to check on her. He still wasn't really worried, as he kind of figured that she was just taking her sweet time getting back and was prepared to tease her about it when he saw her. When he got back to the family in the campsite, he didn't see her at all. He asked the other campers about Frida, but none of them had seen her either. She had never even made it back to the small camp, and they certainly would have noticed her. After a quick search around the area by her family and friends, she wasn't immediately found, and she was quickly reported missing. No time was wasted, it seems, and 5 search parties over the next 2 weeks, including dogs, police, and helicopters, combed the woods looking for any sign of the girl, but to no avail, because no trace again had been found for a while.
That's right. This is the only case of a disappearance within the triangle in which a body was in fact later discovered. The finding of Frida's body, however, was not exactly helpful. She was so badly decomposed that they weren't even able to determine how she died. But the weirdest part is that the place where she was found was right out in the open, in full and easy view, in a place where searchers had repeatedly walked in an effort to find her. The searchers were completely baffled as to how this could have happened. Reportedly, she had certainly not been there before. Why was she there now, weeks later?
The aliens picked her up and dropped her back off.
Yep.
Okay, so this is where a lot of the folklore really started picking up steam. In the 5 years of strange disappearances, but really, the lore had gone on for quite a bit longer with another group of people. A tribe of Algonquin people also resided in the area. According to them, the mountain has always been cursed, a place of negative and strange energy, if you will. The mountain was a place to be avoided, and the Algonquins were careful not to enter the woods, except only to bury their dead. There was even a legend that people would travel to the top of the mountain standing up on the stone on the peak in order to get a good look of the area surrounding them. Legend has it that the people who stepped on the stone would be devoured by it and never heard from or seen again.
So we got man-eating rocks now, on top of a wild man and a possible serial killer. As early as the mid-1800s, way before any of the documented disappearances really started, there are stories that describe a large beast being seen on the mountain and in the woods of Glastenbury. It is described as a tall, hairy creature that sneaks around quietly in the woods. Supposedly, their first report from the driver and several passengers of a stagecoach that was passing through the woods from Bennington to Glastenbury. It was raining really hard, and the stagecoach had come to a point where the road was completely washed out, so they had to stop to avoid getting stuck or injuring their horses.
The driver grabbed his lantern and jumped down from his spot to walk closer to the area in order to better assess the situation, and to see if they would possibly be able to pass through the area. As he walked along the edge of the trees, he noticed that there was very fresh, very large footprints along this area as well. He also noted that the tracks were well placed out, so he knew that this thing was most definitely enormous in size. He knew that whatever made them had to be very close by because the intense rain would have washed them away very quickly. As he was considering this, the horses started getting restless back at the carriage and seemed to be a little spooked. He walked back to the carriage and calmed them down.
He was speaking with the passengers, telling them what he had seen out on the road and wanted to know what they made of the situation. Then, the horses started going crazy. They were trying to run in all different directions and pulling dangerously on the stagecoach. These were obviously well-trained horses, so they thought there must be something out there lurking just beyond their field of vision that was making the horses nervous and upset.
At this point, the story goes that the passengers then began to exit the stagecoach one by one. I'm not completely sure why this was, because I feel like I would have stayed in there.
Absolutely.
But possibly the horses were freaking out so much that they were worried about them dragging the carriage into a dangerous situation and thought it more safe to be outside, which is fair, I guess.
Yeah.
Just as the last passenger put his foot on the ground, they heard tremendous footsteps charging toward them. The passengers scrambled out of the way just as something huge and powerful dealt a savage blow to the carriage. The passengers and driver were terrified, hiding in the nearby woods from whatever was out there. It was too dark for them to have fully seen it, but they knew it was black and it was big. Not only that, the footprints that the driver saw along with the sound of its footsteps made them think that the creature was bipedal.
As they hid, they could hear the creature running around up near the road, continuing to deal blow after blow to the stagecoach. The horses were still going crazy, completely panicked at this point as the creature angrily attacked.
Save the horses!
The passengers were quiet, trying not to draw attention to themselves as they waited to see what would happen. Waited for it to be over. Soon the stagecoach completely toppled on its side and the attack stopped. The creature still walking around up on the road. As the cold, stinging rain continued and the passengers watched the area with intense fear. The creature soon came into view under the dim moonlight and they could distinguish two large eyes on a dark-colored, hairy creature that appeared to all of them to be at least 8 feet tall. The passengers must have been quiet enough because the creature, calm at this point, turned around and walked back into the woods on the opposite side of the road. The creature was from then on called the Bennington Monster.
Werewolf!
Bigfoot.
Bigfoot's not usually that aggressive, though.
I just want to point out that ironically, we're into episode 19? This will be episode 19. And this is the very first time we have mentioned Bigfoot on Bigfoot for Breakfast. I've heard lots of stories where he was aggressive, where he would run at people.
On www.benningtontriangle.com, there's a video interview with a teacher from the area who tells a story of a Bigfoot-like creature. Ricky Harrington, who is now the supervisor of what was Glastenbury, actually uses a picture of Bigfoot as his letterhead. This teacher states that he was hearing shrill sounds out in the woods one day that sounded like a woman either crying or laughing very loudly. It's a bobcat. It's a bobcat.
Honestly, I think the
Bigfoot bobcat.
I think that a lot of those sounds where women are screaming or crying, it's a bobcat.
He said that the sound echoed around their camp, seeming to come in close and then circle farther away, and that this went on for almost an entire night.
In 2003, a man named Ray Dufresne states that he was driving on the road near Glastenbury Mountain and he saw a large black thing on the side of the road that was covered in black hair, walking upright and was well over 6 feet tall. He was one of several similar reports around the area of the time.
Loggers from the early years of Glastenbury reported many incidents of strange lights in the air and in the trees. People made of shadows, thunderbirds.
Yeah, you never heard of thunderbirds?
Thunderbirds.
We could do a whole episode on thunderbirds. They're so cool.
And giant beast men. The mysterious lights in the sky have been found reported as far back as the 1800s. But there was a recent sighting, and by recent I mean 1984.
Because I'm not old. I was recently born.
Supposedly there were several witnesses that all described huge lights shaped like silos darting around in the sky. Maybe the missing people were simply abducted by not humans. And by that I mean it was aliens.
God, we can't go one episode.
But we did finally talk about Bigfoot.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of about time.
Everyone's like, so, when are you going to talk about Bigfoot on your Bigfoot podcast? And I'm like, the name is ironic.
Because we really have no intention.
Yeah, it's not even on our list.
Unless y'all start requesting it a whole bunch, and then I guess we'll do it. But we kind of feel like Bigfoot has been done so much that there's not really anything new to say.
We could, however, invite some of our friends to teach you what a Bigfoot call sounds like.
Yep, they're pros.
They are pros.
Steve and Pat.
We're calling you out.
I might have a video recording of it. We could just start playing it every time we accidentally say a cuss word.
Mm-hmm.
La 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 la.
No.
I don't remember what it really sounds
either.
like, but I think that was Xena Warrior Princess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what.
Um.
It's too much late night TV when we were 10.
Anyway.
Of course, we also have to explore other theories that have been presented through time that come more from beyond the veil. We have all heard and know that there are certain places in the world in which reality, perception, and possibly the boundary between the dimensions is a bit thin.
Oh, fell in a hole.
Oh.
Oh.
If an Iowan falls in a black hole. Oh.
Oh.
Oh, darn.
Dag nabbit. Heckin' hole.
Nobody says that.
Doggo says that.
Who's Doggo?
Heckin' hole.
I don't know what you're talking about. Such a millennial.
I just read a lot of memes.
True. Author John A. Keel talks about this and states that in these places or window areas, physical reality is less concrete, and this leads to a disproportionately high number of reported paranormal phenomena. He states that there are possibilities within the thinness of the interdimensional division here that accidental doorways can be created and people can slip through them. Oh. There are notable areas all over the United States and in the world that are known for this type of thing, and this line of belief has a significant amount of support, including mine.
And the locals surrounding Glastenbury Mountain and the surrounding woods are fearful of the area as well. It's known for very erratic weather and wind patterns that make this area extremely difficult to navigate along with its harsh terrain.
Native Americans reportedly had legends regarding this land for many years prior to its settlement. They didn't, and still don't, set foot in these woods or on the mountain except to bury their dead. And then they hustle out of there. The lore states that on top of Glastenbury Mountain is where the four winds meet, and that it was an evil place.
As recently as 2008, an article written in the Bennington Banner newspaper about another man who had experienced a very strange incident in the forest around Glastenbury Mountain. Robert Singley, a local teacher of music composition at the Bennington College, had been walking on the trail, but unlike many others, he lived to tell the tale. That was very poetic.
It was. It's like a poem. Keep going. I was going to say it's like a Longfellow. Is it Longfellow that's always writing about nature?
Lots of poets write about nature.
Frost. Robert Frost. He writes a lot about nature. There's one that writes like excessively about nature, and it's beautiful.
Stingley was 27 years old, and it was the middle of the day when he departed on what was to be a short hike off Harbor Road in Woodford Hollow. Were you wearing a red jacket? Ironically, this is the exact same place where Paula Weldon disappeared. Remember, she was the 18-year-old college student who disappeared on the trail. He stopped to eat his lunch at the peak of Bald Mountain and then began walking along the ridge line toward the old town of Glastonbury. He got as far as he wanted and then turned back and headed back in the direction of his car. He knew the area very well, and he knew his car was only 3 miles to the east. Driver to the east.
Got a bird named Pinky. Sorry.
After walking 4 to 5 miles in what he says was definitely the correct direction. That's what I say too. Definitely the right direction. So things were looking unfamiliar, and he was concerned that he had not yet reached his car. He says, right before I lost the trail, everything like crescendoed into this weird sort of dizzying confusion. It suddenly got dark, and then it was like, where am I? What's going on? I was totally lost. He ended up spending the night under a large tree and states that the night was kind of expelling a weird sort of, I don't know, a really weird haunting energy.
He was worried that his fiancée would be concerned, and he was right. She had already contacted the police, but no search could be conducted due to the very dark and foggy conditions. He knew it would be light soon, though, so he remained calm and lit a fire with the pages of a composition book that he had in his bag, along with some dry birch that he found around the area.
Morning came, and he tried to walk back to his car once again. He walked an additional 3 or 4 miles and reached a sign that said Goddard's Shelter, which confused him greatly because this shelter was located almost to the peak of Glastenbury Mountain. He's quoted in the article saying, I thought I was camped out about a 1/4 mile from my car, and instead I woke up totally on the other end of this ridge, literally 6 or 7 miles away from where I thought I was. It didn't make any logical sense at all. At this point, he started to go back and remembered passing the same tree at which he camped, but other than that, the trail appeared completely different than it had the day before. Huge differences were noted now that he wouldn't have missed. See, like, I struggle. In general, that's the statement. I struggle.
That's just it.
But I don't recognize trees, per se.
No, he was talking about, I guess I should have been more specific. You would recognize groups of trees or types of trees that were in an area, but he was talking actually about downed trees that were completely across the trail that he would have had to climb over. And they were there this time, but he didn't remember any of it before. You don't remember trees as landmarks, like strangely growing trees? And
I mean, they have to really stand out, but all trees kind of look alike.
yeah, not really
No.
at all.
No, well, no. I mean, obviously, I'm aware that there are different types of trees, different types of leaves, things like that. They grow different.
And think about the difference between cedar trees and birch trees, which are in the area.
Well, yeah.
Completely different.
If they're all mixed together, all in the area.
I don't know.
I don't know.
That's your problem.
That's why I don't go to the woods.
You don't go outside.
Homegirl don't belong in the woods.
Homegirl does not. Sam would be swallowed by that rock.
Go to the north. You're using words that I don't understand.
He was found by police at about 11:30 a.m. that morning, and looking back on it, he still really doesn't understand what happened. He says that he feels like logically he must have accidentally taken a side trail, but he had walked these woods so many times, and deep down, he knows he didn't. He states either I took a side trail, which really doesn't make any sense, or something weird happened. All
That's
of
my
the
excuse
above.
next time I get lost. Something weird happened. Like, yeah, you were outside.
Navigationally, things didn't make any sense in my yard.
In my yard.
I love the woods. I could spend
I
all
do too, but
day
they're
just walking
scary.
around. They're not scary. I mean, they are kind of after, if you guys have ever read Missing 411 by David Paulides.
There's another story as well from 2008 that was dug up by Chad from the obscurevermont.com website that states that 2 hikers were walking along the long trail. Walking with long trail is what it says. Well,
They were walking
long
on.
trail.
They were
He
walking.
was the spirit guide.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't the spirit guide.
He had a ponytail and he always had a pencil behind his ear. Anyway, he was walking along the long trail let me go back. This is actually not a person. When they met another man named Dave. Dave was a worker along the trail and his job was to rebuild and repair the fire towers in the area. Only you can prevent forest fires, Dave.
Probably more than just, don't put that on Dave.
So, they talked to him for a while about rumors that they've heard going on in the area, and Dave told them a strange story of his own. So, as you can imagine, with his job, he spent quite a lot of time in the remote areas of Glastenbury Mountain and did some work by himself up on the fire tower at the summit for long periods of time. He camped up at Goddard's shelter close to the peak, and when his friends would come up to check on him and sometimes stay with him, they reported that there were some nights where he would sit upright in his sleep, laughing uncontrollably for long periods of time, and they were unable to shake him from it. Other nights he would cry and scream while sleeping. This scared his friends considerably, since he was always known to be so down to earth, and the behavior was so disturbing for him, and they had never seen him do this before.
There are some logical theories that people have posed over the years as to why many have gone missing in the mountains, or things that may have led up to the folklore surrounding this place. As far as the actual disappearances go, where bodies were never found. Some simply state that these people may have gotten lost in the mountain, and into the night, the temperatures dropped to considerable lows. One thing that happens when people get into a hypothermic state is something called terminal burrowing. It is a survival behavior that will cause people to panic and find somewhere small in which to huddle and try to get warm as they can just prior to freezing to death. So a lot of times they hide themselves in a tiny remote place, and this would make it very difficult for them to be found later.
So they could be huddled in a little place, like maybe while the search parties are looking for them, and then maybe an animal can find them, like drag them out, and then suddenly, whoop, there they are.
UFOs.
And UFOs. So we also discussed earlier that Glastenbury was established initially as a mining and logging town. So this would logically tell you that there are likely abandoned mine shafts and tunnels scattered all over the area. So if a person were to go off trail, they may accidentally fall through one of these, which would make them nearly impossible to locate. We also have to take into consideration the sheer vastness of the area and the thickness of the forest when trying to search for a single person.
I think somewhere I read that this forest at the foot of Glastenbury Mountain was like 23,000 acres. and it's thick. It was also talked about earlier how the mountain had an odd wind pattern, and it can be very disorienting. The wind pattern even causes plants to grow in strange patterns and directions in the area. And if you look up online too, you can also see pictures of this, where trees almost grow in an S shape, or they'll grow straight up and then like sharply turn to the left and then go straight up again. They're weird.
I went to a place like that in South Dakota.
Yeah, I remember seeing pictures of that.
Another more recent report of strange occurrences comes from Writer and Adventurer, who's the administrator for the website obscurevermont.com that we talked about earlier. I have to mention that his articles go into a lot of detail, and we found them to be some of the best laid out explanations and descriptions of events for this area. So if you're interested in further reading, this is a good place to go.
There's also a number of books written about the area too. I don't remember what they're called, but if you go on Amazon, you can find some really good books that Chad talked about on his website too.
Chad told a story in which he and some friends were up on the mountain, and as they were trying to descend, they were met with a very sudden and dramatic change in weather. The atmosphere went from bright and sunny to clear and torrential rains and winds very, very quickly, which left them dangerously stranded on the mountain slope. They finally made it back and noticed that not far from where they were stranded and on further down the mountain, the area was bone dry. No one else had experienced this horrific storm at all, and most completely disbelieved them.
So that's about all I could muster up for this week's episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast. I think we've pretty well covered about every aspect that we could, and we hope we kept you guys interested. As usual, we thank you so much for listening to our little show, and we appreciate every single one of you and hope that you'll continue coming back and checking out future episodes because we have a very long list of topics in mind for you, so be prepared and keep listening. Make sure you push the subscribe button and tell your friends about us because the best way to spread the word about a podcast is by telling people. So do it. We would really appreciate you for it even more. So you will hear from us again when the next episode drops on Tuesday.
Episode.
Scatchatoon.
Episode.